Good afternoon. This is Tuesday, October 15th, and this is the 4 o'clock council informational meeting. And I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. We're going to start out with a brief report from Public Services Committee. Kenny?
Thank you, Chair. At the last Public Services Committee meeting, October 8th, 2013, we reviewed and approved a paratransit task force to take a look at paratransit and transit operations in the future, and move that forward to be putting together a task force now. Next on the agenda was the taxi cab ordinance review. Jim David, our council clerk, made opening remarks, introduced Byron Corcoran of the Centodyne Corporation of America. This company basically makes taxi meters, and most of the taxi meters or companies in the city use their taxi meters. There was a discussion about GPS capabilities in meters, cost, installation, and manufacturing information. We took public testimony from citizens and taxi cab owners on the proposed revisions that have been added to the ordinance, and also explained that Councilwoman Aguilar and I met with the mayor and brought him up to speed on this ordinance and the changes that have been proposed, and are giving the mayor and the and his staff some time to review that and make any other suggestions. At the next at the next Public Services meeting, we plan on taking more testimony and working on maybe having a work session with the council so that we can discuss over these proposed changes and move forward with hopefully a new ordinance by December.
Councilor Stegers.
Yes. Kenny, I read the article in the Argus Leader yesterday, and when I read the first sentence in the article, which was on the front page, I guess I was really appalled. Now, maybe I shouldn't be, but let me ask you the question. When I read that first sentence about maybe requiring taxis to operate 24 hours, I'm thinking, wow, this is a nice, easy way to put people out of business. Was that seriously talked about?
Yes, sir, it has been seriously discussed. What's happening right now is these single cab owners, when they get a phone call, and if they're not in operation, they're calling somebody else to go pick up their rides. And when people are calling a company, they want that company to come up and pick them up. And that's some of the concerns that we have heard from citizens. We've taken a look at ordinances of other communities in our area just to see how some of their ordinances would fit with what we're trying to do, and we feel that we're on a very good track here. Basically, what we're saying is that if you're going to be a taxi business, you're going to be a taxi business here in Sioux Falls, and taxis should be available 24/7.
Okay, if taxis should be available 24 hours, a day, okay, you can also say the same thing about our bus service. If we're going to require taxis to operate 24 hours a day, we ought to require our bus service to operate 24 hours a day too.
And that's where we're going to have a council work session to have this type of discussion.
Because I'm very concerned that there are certain taxi owners in this city that want to put their competition out of business, and we shouldn't be involved in this kind of activity, putting people out of business.
In no way are we trying to put people out of business. What we are trying to do is update an ordinance that is very much out of touch with what's happening today.
But did anybody mention that this is going to put people out of business? Did anybody express any concern about that?
There has been concern expressed, and that's why we're still discussing this at this time.
And I might just butt in here, Council.
Proposed revisions, these are not dead set in stone.
Councilor Anderson, are you proposing then, instead of a working session for the committee, it'll be just part of a general working session for the council?
I am going to suggest that, yes, is that once we get through with the next meeting in November, that we try to set up a work session for the entire council to discuss this ordinance. This ordinance was created back in the early 80s, and it hasn't been touched. And now that we are looking at it and finding out the issues with the taxis operating in our city, and that there's no enforcement. We have no, as I'll say, boots on the ground to go out and check on these cabs to see that they're operating properly and in a safe manner. So
Okay,
I
good.
strongly feel that this is something that the entire council needs to discuss.
I think to that too, Councilor Segers. I think there's going to be some good discussion, and I think we do need to have some more discussion on this. So
Yes,
one more,
If I
please.
could just further add, the only person that I've heard that's concerned about the issue of taxis in the city of Sioux Falls is a taxi owner who doesn't like the competition, and he's going to try to use this method to try to eliminate competition and benefit himself. We shouldn't be engaged in this activity.
Good, thank you. Is there anything else for the committee? Kenny, was that good from the report?
That is, yes.
Okay, good. Council open discussion. Is there anything else right now? Councilor Jameson, please.
Thank you. I just want to give a brief update on the South Dakota Municipal League trip that I was on last week. We started on Tuesday, went through Friday at noon. I was there along with 8 others that from the city that were there that I saw. Tracy Turbeck was there, Jim David and Dave Bixler were there. The chief was there, the health director was there. There's a lot of places for the city to be involved in, and some of the other people were serving on committees in some way or one way or another. But we had a good session, I would say. It's my first session. We talked a lot about a lot of things, code enforcement, public works. We even had a hypnotist for some of the entertainment. I think Dave Bixler is still hypnotized now, but we talked about economic development from the governor's office. They did a great program, what to do so we don't get sued, or what not to do so we don't get sued, I guess, how to change government. A lot of good speakers, good classes. I am on the board of directors as well as a trustee, and I think that's part of the requirements as coming from Sioux Falls with the size of the city we are. I was hoping to engage more with Rapid City and their mayor and council members, but a lot of them were held up, but as well as a lot of other communities from the west because of the snowstorm. But still a good learning experience, and I look forward to going back. There's another meeting, I believe, in April. Councilor Erpenbach was our board member before, so I'm just cutting my teeth for now. So,
Good. Is there anything else for council discussion? Councilor Segers, please.
Yeah, this is not so much discussion, but just a question about the consent agenda that we have here in front of us. I was wondering, how come that's not on the internet?
it is.
It is.
Is it? I guess I've never seen it.
If you go on the
Okay.
if you go on the agenda and go right through the agenda, if you click the consent agenda items, click that link, it'll bring you to another document that will show
okay.
all the items.
Oh, well, thanks for
Yeah.
telling me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor Jameson.
As well, if I could, I'm not sure if you have a copy of this, but I do have an amendment that I'll be proposing tonight on the TIF ordinance. It's regarding the application process. It's what's being used in Rapid City. And Rapid City has had extensive use of TIFs in the past, but essentially all we're after is a full disclosure and transparency of all the individuals who are applying for a TIF. You'll see that language. I'll get a copy of it if you don't have a copy, but I just wanted you to be aware of it, and if you have questions, let's talk about it. Thanks.
Councilor Anderson?
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, we're not
Don't
finding
have
that over
copies.
here.
I don't think
I'll
any of
get
us
you a
do,
copy
Greg.
then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Oh, it's in
sure.
your red notes.
In the red notes.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right. I propose that I will be bringing forth an amendment to the TIF 8 on utilizing the facade easement, using TIF to pay for that. That's something that is very new. I understand that it is approved through state law, but the City of Sioux Falls does have a facade easement program. This council, in approving the last budget, doubled the amount of money that goes in that facade easement program. And what my amendment will say is that the city will not utilize tax increment finance revenue for the purpose of securing a facade easement. And the reasoning for this is once again, we do have a facade easement program, and by allowing TIF to secure a facade easement is like giving a blank check. And I just don't feel that that is something that's necessary.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and just one other note here. Before us today, and Jim David, our legislative operations manager, gave us a copy of some possible legislative priorities. I want to bring your attention to the one down below, the new items. Item number 1 there specifically, it says any business or person who transports persons for a fee and wishes alcohol to be present on the vehicle for use by the customers is required to purchase a $100 carrier license from the Department of Revenue. It's my understanding this is supported by the Municipal League as one of their legislative priorities and was accepted by them. I just wanted to point that out. I've also asked Jim to get us a copy, if he might, of the county, the school, and the chamber's priorities, their legislative priorities for this session. Not knowing exactly what they're looking at, I thought it might be of interest for us. Take a look at those. We'll have action on those here coming forward here the first part of November. And some more discussion possibly about our legislative priorities. So please take a look at them. If anybody has any other input or wants to discuss them further in a work session, just let me know. Yes, Councilor Erpenbach.
Well, just a reminder that the City County School Board breakfast tomorrow morning will have legislative from all those groups. Some of us won't be attending because of conflicts with a fundraiser, but that will be that topic tomorrow. So
You bet.
it's that time of year.
And that was noted too, and we hope to get that information from them. Is there anything else? Good. We'll move on into reports, and we'll start with the September financial report. Tracy Turbeck, please. Director Turbeck.
Denise. There we go. I know how much you look forward to this report every month, as I do, especially when the news is good. We've got more good news to share, and I'd like to go through that first, and then at the request of council leadership, when I'm finished with my financial update and addressed any questions you might have on that, I'd like to give just a brief update on the status of the Operation Timber Strike costs and the FEMA reimbursements that the city has received. You might recall I sent some information out to you recently, and as follow-up to that, there was a request to address that at a public meeting. So I will be happy to do that as well. So with that, I'll get started on the monthly financial. As we always do, we track a number of economic indicators. Unemployment in the area continues to be very, very low. August came in at 3%, which essentially is flat from July, so we're at a 3% unemployment rate here in the Sioux Falls MSA. We've got a little over 130,500 people working here in the Sioux Falls area, which is up significantly from a year ago. You can see on the graphic, we continue to mark much better numbers than we have in the past couple of years. And even those were relatively very good compared to state and national numbers as well. Building permits, the value of building permits issued continues to be very strong this year. Again, we had a strong year last year, and really from the get-go in 2013, we've been outpacing last year's numbers significantly. Through September 30th of this year, we've already exceeded the value of building permits issued all of last year, so we've got a quarter of the year to go, and we've already exceeded last year's mark. Through September, we've issued a little over $500 million in building permits. Last year, through the first 3 quarters, we had issued about $341 million, so that's an increase of more than $160 million in permits, or about a 47% increase. So we continue to see the construction activity really surging here in Sioux Falls. Sales tax revenues, of course, the city's bread and butter for many of our services that we provide. This is the general sales tax that the city levies. You can see that we've been showing really very solid growth for the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we were growing at about 5%, a little better than that. 1 year ago, about 5.5%, and most recently, we've seen this strong growth getting stronger. We ended September this year with our 12-month rolling growth rate at 6.9%. So that's certainly very, very positive news and reflects a very vibrant local retail economy. Turning to the entertainment tax. Again, this is covering a 24-month period of time. You can see this has been a little more volatile, although it's been showing very solid growth throughout that period. Really peaked in terms of the growth rate during 2012, has dropped back down now to a stable growth rate right around 5%. You can see the most recent change in this growth rate has been slowing since last month. A month ago was at 5.6, so we've seen a modest, small downtick in that growth rate. So we'll continue to watch that, although it probably would not be reasonable to expect it to continue to grow at year after year at the rate it was growing last year at over 7%. So again, 5% or better is certainly very solid, although we'd certainly welcome a pickup in the pace on the entertainment tax. Looking at the general fund, revenues and expenses year to date, we are very much on track with budget in both cases. Year to date on the revenue side for the general fund, we're up about $11 million or 13% through the first 9 months of the year compared to the first 3 quarters last year. We're at 71% of our revenue budget, which is ahead of the pace we were last year when compared to budget. Through the first 9 months of last year, we had collected 66% of budgeted revenue, and again this year we're at 71%. Now, that does tie back to what I'll talk about a little bit later in terms of the FEMA dollars that are flowing back into the general fund in the form of revenue reimbursements. On the expense side, through September, we've expended about $100 million in the general fund compared to a little over $87 million a year ago through that same time frame. And again, we are on track with our budget. We're at 71% of budget, just slightly ahead of the pace we were a year ago for our general fund. So we're certainly pleased with where we stand with 3 months left to go in this fiscal year. So with that, I'd address any questions you have regarding the monthly financial update or the slides in this presentation.
Are there any questions for Tracy? Kermit, please.
Yes, Tracy, I remember some time ago there was I think an article that talked about the finance department was going to get together and try to figure out what to do with the FEMA money. Has anything happened there or not?
I think you might be referring to the funds that the city has received from the Corps of Engineers.
Oh, okay.
That was really for the flood control improvements. Yeah, we continue to work on that, and I would expect that, well, we're in the middle of October now, but sometime next month we'd be back before you and talking about some options for the council to be thinking about and talking about.
How about the FEMA money, though?
Well, the FEMA money, that is a reimbursement that goes back into the fund where the expenditure originated, and almost all of that will go back into the city general fund. There were some other funds that did have FEMA eligible expenses that were reimbursed. For example, our electrical department did have some eligible costs, so they will share in that reimbursement to the extent that they did have expenses.
One more, Kermit, please.
Yeah, one more. Has there been any thought about including council members on this group that's deciding what to do with the Corps of Army Engineers money or not?
Certainly. That's the intention, will be to come back before you
But
and,
I mean,
and
before you
discuss some
come-
options for you.
No, I mean, even before then.
Well, you
right
can,
from the
you can,
get-go.
if you have ideas, Counselor, feel free to stop in or call me or talk to the mayor. I mean, there's certainly no closed door or no reason you can't share ideas. We're trying to put everything on the table that we can and filter through those ideas that seem to have some validity, and we'll bring those before you at some point in the near future.
Has there been any thought on the part of the city council for us to have our own little group to talk about what to do with the money? Instead of having just something coming from the administration, that we actually have something we might be presenting.
Certainly nothing can be done with that money without the council authorizing that appropriation.
I mean, we could do this ourselves.
You can appropriate money.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
we could come up with our own idea, and we don't need the administration necessarily on this.
I would suggest, Councilor Stegers, that you, after the session is over, talk to us, to myself and Karski, and we can take that under advisement, and we can put it to the other council members to see. Personally, myself, I'm looking forward to the report coming in from the city, and at that point in time, I think then we're going to have quite a bit of discussion about what we really believe, where we believe that money should be spent or what we should do with it. So I do look forward to the reports.
Mr. Chair, I believe that at our November fiscal committee meeting, we will be taking up some discussion on this matter.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else? Any other questions at this time? Then we'll get another update. Okay, Tracy, why don't you continue, please? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Anderson.
Tracy, a few weeks ago, I'm on my pet project here, the arterial street funding. A few weeks ago, or almost over a month ago, I asked for 2003 to 2008, the 0.92% that was spent. Can you give me a ETA or what's going on with that?
I know the finance team has been working with Public Works, and I know they've been in communication with David Bixler, your budget analyst, on that. One of the things that's taking a fair amount of time to compile that information is that prior to the sales tax getting rounded up, so to speak, to a full percentage point, those dollars were not necessarily looked at or accounted for in the same way they are today. So they're trying to recreate those categorizations that you're looking for in those earlier years, and I know that necessitates Public Works going through on a project-by-project basis, identifying how each of those projects was funded, where they would have fallen if we did them under today's system of how we plan and fund capital projects. So I know they're working on it, and I think they're getting very close. I believe it was Monday last week before I left town for the Municipal League Conference. I know they were meeting on it again, but I just haven't had an update from that meeting yet. So I know they're working on it, and they'll get it to you just as quickly as they can.
Thank you.
Councilor Jamieson, please.
Tracy, on page 1 of the report, the monthly financial report, under the budget status, intergovernmental revenue, federal grants for 4.7 and 8. Well, all I'm really trying to figure out, is that all the federal money that we receive as a city? Is that, I know we get money through the state, but I'm just saying directly from the federal government. I'm just looking for the numbers. Is that the right place to look?
Well, that's certainly a significant portion of federal funds that we do get. That would not include all federal programs. It would be just those that are accounted for within the general fund. For example, community development has a fund of its own outside of the general fund, and they do receive significant federal dollars for their housing programs, for example. So there isn't, that doesn't reflect all federal money. Anything that would go to the public health department, the police department, fire, the FEMA dollars that are coming in, so those would all be reflected in the general fund. But those departments that have a separate fund that also get federal funding would show up somewhere else in this report.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Okay, Tracy.
Okay, great. I'm happy to give you a high-level overview of the Operation Timber Strike. We're getting very close to kind of closing the book, so to speak, on that in terms of the costs, the final invoices. We've got a few bills left to pay yet, but I think we're getting very close to the end of having all those bills paid. We do estimate at this point that the final total cost will come in at about $8.3 million, right around that number. If you recall, when we addressed the council back in June and talked about a supplement that you ultimately approved, at that time we were estimating just over $9 million. So we're certainly happy to see that total cost come in below what we had estimated shortly after the ice storm. In regard to the FEMA and state reimbursements, the state also participates kind of alongside FEMA with some dollars. Those reimbursements for those eligible costs in large part have been submitted. For some of those things that we haven't paid for yet, obviously those haven't been submitted. We really have to incur the cost and have an invoice in hand before we can submit those. So there will be some more kind of trickling in and being submitted to FEMA to finally close that out. But through September, we had received just shy of $6 million in reimbursements, and that would include the 75% reimbursement from FEMA for those eligible costs, and the state participates at 10% on using the same eligibility criteria. So there will be some small amount of reimbursements to come yet. I think we're probably at 95%, I would say, of what I would expect us ultimately to receive. And I will say that I think the city has been treated very fairly from the standpoint of working with the state Office of Emergency Management and with the federal FEMA folks. I think they've been very reasonable to deal with. I've had very good feedback from the city team on how they've approached our particular situation and in working with them and working through all of the various federal regulations and rules. I think we've been very fairly treated pretty much across the board. So I did want to make sure to convey that. The bottom line, most of the costs, as I mentioned a minute ago, were borne by the general fund. There were a few outliers. I mentioned the light department. I think a handful of other departments really had small amounts of expenditures, but far and away the lion's share of the dollars that were paid out on the disaster, that $8.3 million, come from the general fund, the city general fund. And so those reimbursements are important to maintain the financial strength of the general fund without depleting our reserves, but of course they don't reimburse 100%. The bottom line impact to the general fund to our reserves, that are those dollars that will actually be used from our reserves to cover those costs, we're estimating at about $1.1 million, right around that figure. So that's certainly a positive, I guess, outcome of this whole process, that we were at one time looking at a much more significant hit to our city general fund reserves. Working with the state and with the FEMA folks, we've managed to mitigate that financial impact to the city. And I think it really underscores how important it is, or why it's so important for the city to maintain strong reserves and maintain a strong financial position. That we don't know that the next time something happens, that if the state and FEMA will be there to participate the way they did this time. We are certainly thankful that they were here for us this time, but it's important for us to be prepared and be able to handle that, and frankly cover those costs in the interim, because those dollars don't show up right away. It does take a long time to churn those reimbursements through. The last thing I would mention is I'm really proud of the work that the city team did. Of course, I think the response itself to the disaster was very, very positive, and the public was very appreciative of the work that was done kind of with the boots on the ground. What I'm talking about here is the work that was done kind of behind the scenes, and the heavy lifting when it comes to dealing with the paperwork and the documentation and the record keeping and the back and forth with the FEMA folks on that documentation and proving the expenses that we did incur. The team received very high praise from both the state folks and the federal folks on the quality of submittals that were made, the quality of the record keeping, the quality of the documentation that was submitted. So I think those folks that don't often get recognized, I'd like to just publicly give them a pat on the back for doing a great job and really looking out for the city's best interest on tracking those costs and minimizing those costs as best they could. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd entertain any other questions.
Rex, please.
Tracy, thank you very much for this report. not a concern and a question, I guess. What is it, 10 million that we had put back in for the levy, the money we got, and then this money, we've received about 6 million of it. That concerns me then that we're still behind on our 25% target for reserves on both situations. Well, 11% on one and which we're over, but then the 25. If those funds are back in there, are they stuck away someplace else that they don't show up in general fund so that this 25% isn't back up to where it should be?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. First of all, the money that came from the Corps of Engineers for the flood control work did not go into the general fund. That's been put into the capital improvement fund. That is the fund
That would make
that
sense.
is servicing the debt and where those types of projects would typically be funded. So that has not gone into the general fund and won't be reflected in those reserve numbers. But the 23.6% that you're seeing is the impact of certainly the additional budget authority you gave relative to the ice storm, the Operation Timber Strike. But the number that's not reflected in that percentage is the additional revenue that's anticipated, because that's based off budget figures. And when the budget is adjusted, it was adjusted for expenditures only. And I suppose in retrospect, I think going forward, when we do amend the budget in a situation like that, we should also be amending the revenue budget. We know the money's going to come in, or fairly certain it's going to come in,
Yeah, no.
but we don't really adjust the budget numbers. So
I would
if you had done that, you'd see a number in excess of 25%. So.
I don't know if I agree with you on that amending the revenue stream, because unless it's a taxable type thing where we know the money, we've got a history of it and things like that, I'd rather see the true and right figures there, and maybe a footnote that says can anticipate, rather than putting anticipated funds into there, and then all of a sudden a year later we fight for 10 years like we did with the levy funds and finally get the money. I think it would be better to know exactly where we stand on that rather than have some anticipated funds in there. But
there's certainly different ways to look at that. I guess the important thing to remember is that at the end of the year, when we do the calculations based on the actual fund balance and the year-end expenditures, I think we'll look
but the money
very
should
good.
be there already, shouldn't it? I mean, we should have, according to what you're saying, there should be about a $2 million shortfall right now and another million something coming in. And so we've already reimbursed of the 8.3 that we did. We've put back into their 6 million already. And I'm concerned that we're not at that 25% mark yet, which we were substantially over that before this whole thing started.
Well, I guess what I'm trying and maybe not succeeding in communicating is that the percentage is based on the numbers you see under the current budget column. The expenditures are accounted for in that $141 million budget. So we've added $8 million to the general fund budget for Operation Timber Strike, but we have not adjusted the $129 million in anticipated revenues for the FEMA reimbursements that really are revenues. So
Well, no,
so
you said the money was put in there already. You haven't adjusted it for that, though? So you haven't put it in?
The budget numbers have not been. The actual revenue numbers do reflect that.
Right, okay. So, again, an accounting thing. If the money's not there yet, or it is there, and maybe I'll talk to Bixler about that so that he can explain the ins and outs of that. Okay, we're close, and the money's going to be there, and we should be seeing that jump up.
I'm confident that at the end of the year you'll be happy with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilor Staggers?
Let's see. Oh, yes. Tracy, you mentioned record keeping and so forth during the ice storm and so forth. We had a consultant doing a lot of that, didn't we? And I guess I'm trying to remember, where was this consultant from and how much did we pay?
Yeah, I don't recall where they're headquartered. There was a firm that was hired to do much of the documentation on the actual work that was being completed in the field for the document. And this is compliant with the FEMA requirements in order to maintain eligibility to get those reimbursements. They require the location of the work to be documented, where trees have been removed, make sure that the monitors understand or are monitoring the weights at the scale so that they know that the weights are being accurately measured. So that's the kind of work that this firm that you're referring to was doing. And as I recall, it was, we had originally estimated it to be about 10%. Ultimately, it would be about 10% of the overall cost. I think it came in a little higher than that. I think their final bill was just under $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. Tracy, yes, I've heard a lot of good comments about the Project Timber Strike and how it was handled and how the city's efforts. Lots of good comments. Clearly, you can see it in the way that the city looks today. But it does bring up a question, this whole idea of the general fund getting reimbursed from FEMA. Help me understand what would happen if, say, a tornado came through the city, wiped out the Empire Mall, and caused another debris issue like we had with the ice storm, but as well took out our water treatment plant. So we've got the money in our operating budget to pay for services to pick up branches and do that kind of cleanup work. But what about capital money to rebuild a building, say City Hall or this building or something like it that we had to replace? Would insurance cover that, or would we need capital funds readily available to pay for it?
Most of the city's properties, and this is really kind of outside my purview, but yeah, we certainly carry property insurance on all the city buildings. When you get into wastewater treatment plants, there's a lot of stuff in the ground. To the extent that that's insured or could be damaged by a disaster, I guess I'm not really certain on that, but the expectation would be that insurance would be your first recourse to cover those costs. To the extent that one of our enterprise funds encounter some uninsured losses for whatever reason, they would be expected to have the financial resources to cover those repairs and make those improvements on their own. Worst case scenario, if the wastewater department was affected and impacted to an extent beyond what they were financially capable of dealing with, and the general fund had the resources, that would certainly be another alternative available to the city to rectify whatever problems we were having at that point.
Okay, so we wouldn't have any trouble taking the money from our reserve account and using it for capital expenses. We would just have to pass an ordinance.
Well, there's a way to make that happen. Yeah, whether there would be trouble or not, I guess, is kind of up to the powers that be.
All right, very good. Thanks.
Any other questions for Tracy? Thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next report, not only do we have the city budget we look at, but we also take a look at the city council's budget. And on quarterly, we do ask Dave Bixler to come forward and just give us an update on the council budget. David?
Dave Bixler, council staff. On the city council budget, in our other operating in both the internal audit and city council, we're running at 90% to budget. And a large contributor to that is that our big expenses incurred earlier in the year, such as the Odd Bailey expense for the internal audit, municipal league dues, National League of City dues, those types of things. So that's why we see those coming in at 90% to budget at this point. Overall, for the City Council Department, we're coming in at 72% to budget year to date, which is right in line with being at about 3/4 of the way through the year. 2013 expenses yet to be incurred are the National League of Cities travel, the American Dream Coalition, there's some registration and travel going on there, our monthly publication expenses with the Argus Leader. We have a second installment of the ADA compliance review for our vote centers, and then also the labor and benefits for Q4 of 2013. And that is what I have.
Questions for Dave? We're good? Okay. Thank you very much, David.
Yep.
Guess we're up next here. We got recommended ordinance changes to the parking ticket appeals process. Matt?
Matt Nelson, Public Parking Facilities Manager. Just briefly wanted to go over the ordinance that we're proposing for changes to the parking ticket appeals process. What this ordinance will do is consolidate the appeals process for parking tickets into the citywide appeals process for all citations that are issued by the maybe health department or a code enforcement department. And what the biggest change you'll see is we currently use appointed hearing officers, and it will go to an administrative hearing officer with legal training. They're actually all attorneys that will overhear any parking ticket appeals. The first reading on this ordinance is this evening. The second reading is on 11/5, and it will go into effect at the end of November. This ordinance went through the Public Services Committee originally last October, and we've been waiting to bring it through until we implemented our software for our new public parking for permits and ticketing, and we'll be implementing that software next month, and this will go live approximately 10 days after our software is implemented. Some of the bigger changes that you will see, kind of the Cliff Notes version, you will see that it's a consolidated process. The deadline to appeal a parking citation will go from 7 days to 15 days. The recommended amount for an appeal fee was $50 when it went through the Public Services Committee. We're recommending that that's reduced to $25 to appeal a parking ticket. That fee is refundable. That fee is also waiverable if you show financial hardship and fill out the appropriate forms. In this process, just as a process standpoint, we'll go from the parking ticket clerks to our office, which gives us more oversight on the program. And the idea behind that is that you would come to our office to fill out the form, and if there are any equipment issues or errors that were potentially made, we can find those problems on the front end and correct them before it ever has to go through an appeals process. You will see administrative officers with legal training, and then once the process is or the appeal is turned over to the city attorney's office, they will manage it for the whole appeals process. And that's kind of a summary of what we'll be doing, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those now.
Questions for Matt? Please.
I was looking at this, Matt, and I was thinking I missed last week's Public Services Committee meeting, but I see it was October 9th of 2012, so it's been over a year since we did this. So I was trying to refresh my memory on a few of these things, and the big one, I guess, is the fee to appeal. What is our average parking ticket cost?
Our average parking ticket runs from $5 up to $35, and then so the appeal fee is $25. So that was when we looked at originally why we went from $50 to $25. We thought that was a fair number, and when you look at the city's cost involved in that, it's a portion of our cost. But like I said, it's refundable. So if you win your appeal, you definitely get it back. If there's on the front end, if we find an issue, we're going to fix that on the front end.
And maybe not a question, but maybe something food for thought, I guess. If somebody gets a $5 or $15 or even a $25 parking ticket, and they feel so right in that they did not deserve it, that they actually take the time to file the appeal and come down to make that appeal in person. I mean, the $25 fee even seems a little bit steep just based on the investment that a person makes in coming down to appeal it. I don't have a problem, with a $5 fee, or so I hope that maybe we can discuss the price of this when this comes to us. So, thank you.
I think that's a fair recommendation. So.
Any other questions for Matt? Thank you.
Yep.
Is there any other questions or any other business to come before this council for this meeting? Okay, there being none, I'm going to adjourn, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes for the committee meeting.